Okay, everybody, we're moving on to topic 1.3. The title of this topic is Population Growth and Ethnolinguistic Diversity. Before we get into the topic of ethnolinguistic and population growth in Africa, I'd like for you to just think a minute and discuss America's expansion, something that we're familiar with, something that we know we've all been taught at one time or another in school about how North America came to be, how we are where we are today, and basically what our history is. So if we think about that, and if we think about it in a linear timeline, we can think about, first of all, our native people. We know that North America was inhabited by Native American people, consisting of many different tribes that settled into different regions. And because they were in different regions, and North America being pretty wide and expansive, you had a lot of different climate zones, just as Africa does. And those different climate zones, from your southwest to your northwest to your east, all of these regions played a big part in the culture of our native people. So we can kind of have that as like the origin of North America. And then we know that European explorers came and discovered the land and eventually began to colonize the land. The quest for the expansion of Christianity and resources such as gold and things like that were what Europeans were interested in when being concerned with exploration and the New World. From there, we know that lots and lots of immigrants wanted to come to the New World. This was a place of opportunity and a place of hope, and a chance to start fresh, a chance to own something, to build a business. There was just a lot of hope attached to leaving one's homeland, mainly European at that time, and to come to this new world to start fresh. But we also know that not everybody that came to North America was here by choice. They were not considered an immigrant. Immigrant comes here because they so desire to. But we also know that there were enslaved people and indentured servants that were also brought to the New World. And then we can even think historically then about, once immigrants were here, we had the westward expansion, where, people started to move westward because they knew that they could, if they could make the journey, then there was, first of all, gold on the West Coast, and everybody could claim, acres of land for themselves. So when we think about the history of North America, we're able to kind of visualize or piece together a little bit how people moved around, how the population grew, how groups of people, unfortunately got shoved around or oppressed or changed. But we can kind of visualize how North America went from, one grouping of civilization to kind of track where we are today. Well, not a lot of people know that history about Africa. So this unit is kind of covering some of that expansion, that early expansion in Africa. And this topic is really focusing on the Bantu people. Okay, so aside from the Egyptian kingdoms, which everybody's familiar enough with Egypt and the Egyptian kingdoms, and what a humongous civilization that was throughout a very expansive period of time. But not a lot of people know about the Bantu people. And actually, they have probably the most extensive geographic dispersion throughout Africa, and one of the earliest. So we can trace the Bantu people and their movement and expansion through Africa starting as early as 3500 BCE. And I have here some images of Bantu people, but these are groupings of Bantu people spread all over Africa. You have some of your Western Bantu groups, you have some of your Bantu Zulu groups, some of your Cameroon. So they're not all just from one geographical area or region. They're in different places, which, just like our Native Americans, we now know that climate and geographical region changes and affects culture. So even though we can say that these groupings of people have the same origin of the Bantu, you will see a lot of differences amongst each grouping, and that's because of their geographical influence. What AP wants you to be able to do in 1.3 is analyze this map. So this is our only source in this topic that you'll be responsible for explaining and being able to look at it and know what it means. And basically what they want you to be able to do is look at the movement of the Bantu people. So what I suggest to you is before you kind of dive into this map, be aware of these questions. First of all, try to find where and when was the origin of the Bantu people. Okay. If you look right here, okay, it's marked pretty clearly. Okay, so this kind of central western African region right here is the origin of the original Bantu people. And look, there's a time period here. So around 3000 BCE. My next questions that I want you to think of when you're analyzing this map is then, where were the Bantu people in 1500 BCE? And when you find that on the map, what can you conclude about what you see from this map? And then my next question is, where is the most recent places that the Bantu people settled on this map? And what year was that? So in order to read this map well, you have to remind yourself about the timeline BCE to CE. So BCE is, before the Common Era, and then CE is the Common Era. And basically, it's kind of like a number line, right? Where a number line, you have 0, and everything before 0 is in the negative and kind of counts backwards. And everything after 0 is in the positive and counts forward. Well, the timeline for BCE and CE is the same, except that there is no 0. Okay, it starts at 1. So you have 100 CE, and then you have 200 CE, 300, 400, etc. And then prior to that, you're going to go backwards. Okay, you're going to go 200 BCE, 300 BCE, 400 BCE to go back in time. So I want you to look at this map. I want you to look at the timeline and try to come up with answers to these questions here. The next thing I'm going to have you do is, this is a 4.5 4.5 minute video that was recommended by College Board for this topic. I am able to play the video during this screencast, but the sound will not show up. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the screencast and give you about 5 minutes to go ahead and push play on this video and watch it. And I'm encouraging you to record important facts from the video that can go into your binder. Okay, so we're going to pause the screencast now. Okay, hopefully you found that video really informative and it provided you with some good historical information about the Bantu. And what I want you to do now is I want you to prepare for our next class. At the beginning of class, we're going to get together, and I do expect you to be able to answer these questions for some points. And that means that you're going to have to take a second and analyze the video and the map and the information that you've received from this topic. For question number 1, I want you to be able to tell me and to tell the class what were some of the causes of the Bantu expansion across the continent. So basically, why did the Bantu people start to migrate? Why did they start to move around? What probably was the cause of that? Number 2, how did the Bantu expansion affect linguistic diversity? So we are talking about language. How does one language change, okay, and become so diverse? We know that Africa has probably the most diverse linguistic societies. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many different languages are spoken, but it's extremely, extremely diverse. And again, if we put that into our own realities and we compare that to North America, think about just here in our own country. We may not have different languages per se, but think of all of the different dialects or accents that we have. We in the Midwest definitely speak differently and carry our words differently than you would hear on the East Coast, maybe especially from Boston. And then you think about the Southwest. The Southwest has a lot of Mexican influence. So culturally and linguistically, you have a lot of that like Spanglish that happens. And then think about the deep South, like Mississippi, even Texas, that they speak with a different accent. And we can narrow it down even more if you just think about Illinois. And I can attest that the way a lot of words are pronounced and spoken in Chicago are a lot different than what I hear in Southern Illinois. So if you think about how diverse one language can be in the way that things are pronounced, think about how diverse a language can be in such a humongous continent like Africa. The next question is, how did the Bantu expansion cause so much diversity amongst the same origin of people? And this question really does relate to culture. So how can one culture, or I'm sorry, how can one origin of people have such diverse cultural attributes? So try to be able to explain that. That's something we've already gone over, so you should be pretty good at question number 3. And then number 4, what effect does the Bantu people and their migration movements have on genetic heritage of Africans and African Americans? So talking about modern day contemporary African American people, how can we thread this, right? How can we connect it to the Bantu people all the way back from 3500 BCE? How are they connected genetically? How is their genetic heritage? Okay, so those are the 4 questions I want you to analyze. Please come to the next school day prepared, because this is what we'll be addressing.